Hi everyone, the Partial Prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part. So definitely think and pray for yourself about this information. So today I wanted to talk about Trump possibly being the Harlot of Babylon. The Harlot of Babylon is talked about in Revelation 17 and 18. So I'll just read and comment as I go along. Um, so it says, Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and spoke with me, saying, Come here, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality, and those who dwell on the earth were made drunk with the wine of her immorality. Um, so I mentioned before in one of my videos that sitting on many waters, I talked about waters being like the lies of Satan. Um, and so this harlot is sitting on many waters, like sitting on many lies. Um, and then, um, I mean, it's kind of interesting to talk about Trump being a harlot because, we have thought about this harlot being a woman for a very long time. Um, like a prostitute, a harlot. Um, and for the longest time, I've read these verses and thought it applied to Hillary Clinton because I thought she was a good example of the harlotry in America. Um, but I do also believe in multiple fulfillment of prophecies in the Bible, and so I think these chapters could apply to both Hillary and President Trump. Um, and so actually, it was just kind of interesting because recently I read about it and it was kind of like, these could apply to President Trump. And so I just wanted to present what I was thinking and then you could see what you think. Um, and so then it talks about um, the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality with this harlot. Um, and so if we think about, Jesus being the King of Kings, and so maybe the Jewish people are the kings. And so they're committing acts of immorality with this harlot. Um, and so in my last video, I talked about like the Jewish people following President Trump as being a false messiah. And so that could be their immorality that they're committing. Um, and they were made drunk with the wine of her immorality. And so, like, the Jewish people are being made drunk with this idea of President Trump having this peace deal, this deal of the century. Um, okay, and then it says, And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Okay, so the woman is sitting on a scarlet beast. Okay, so the scarlet beast is definitely connected to the dragon by the red color. And so I talked before too about the dragon being a picture of Obama. And so what I think is kind of interesting about Trump um, is, well, in the Bible, we read about the kings. Judah had their kings, and then Israel would have their kings. Like the northern kingdom had kings, and the southern kingdom had their kings. And when God was listing the kings, he would talk about some of the kings would tear down like the idols of the previous kings. But then sometimes he would say, well, they tore down these idols, but they didn't tear down all the idols. And so, what I think is really interesting about President Trump is that we see in his presidency, he tore down some of the idols of Obama. Um, so he tore down like the Iran deal. Um, and then he was working on trying to, get rid of Obama's health care. Um, and so he was working on tearing down some of Obama's idols. But then it seems like Trump is like replacing them with some of his own idols. And so, like, he was tearing down the Iran deal, but then he was trying to make a deal with North Korea, which, could be a mistake. Um, and then there's this, it's interesting because, they talked about Obama was trying to make a kind of a peace deal with Israel, but Obama was definitely very pro Muslim and pro Arab. Um, and then we see President Trump trying to make this peace deal with Israel, but he's very pro Israel. So it's kind of an interesting comparison between the two. Um, and so, um, so I think it's interesting that so we could see this picture of this woman sitting on a scarlet beast. Now, the woman also could be a picture of America, like the Gentile, um, believers of God, where like the woman is the bride of Christ. Um, but anyways, so but also just like I said, like the woman sitting on a scarlet beast could be a picture of Trump sitting on Obama. Like he's still doing kind of the same, repeating the same kind of, um, you know, patterns that Obama was doing. Um, and then it talks about full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And so, I don't know if the woman has the blasphemous names or the scarlet beast has the blasphemous names. Um, but we could definitely see Obama, definitely was full of blasphemy, so that could be the scarlet beast. Um, but Trump has a similar thing too, where he kind of like can attack people, and call them names. Um, and so then the scarlet beast has 7 heads and 10 horns. And so the 7 heads could be heads relate to, like leadership. Um, and so that could be the last 7 presidents. And then the 10 horns, the 10, um, in my mind, the 10 relates to in the wilderness when Israel was in the wilderness and they sent spies to spy out the land. There was 10 of the spies did not believe when they came back, and then 2 of the spies did believe. And so I think the 10 horns could relate to the 10 spies in the wilderness who did not have faith. Um, and then the woman was clothed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a gold cup full of abominations and of the unclean things of her immorality. Um, so she was clothed in purple and scarlet. Um, scarlet could be a picture of blood. So Trump's actions are causing bloody results. Um, and then it talks about the woman being adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. And so maybe if you see like I think it's possible that gold could relate to the Jewish people and then silver could relate to the Christians. And so the woman being adorned with gold could be a picture of how President Trump has, um, is kind of exerting authority over the Jewish people. Um, and then, like, the precious stones and pearls could be people in America that are you know, in Trump's hands that he has authority over. Um, and then having in her hand a gold cup full of abominations, so the gold again relating to the Jewish people. Um, and then also relating, like, there's a story where Joseph, in the story of Joseph with his brothers, the cup gets put in Benjamin's sack, and so there could be a connection there. Um, we're kind of like, um, President Trump by his actions are causing, like, the if a cup could be the scripture talks about like the cup of suffering, and so Trump could be causing, I mean, he is causing suffering for the Jewish people by his actions toward Israel, so that could be gold cup of abominations, um, and then of the unclean things of her immorality. And then on her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. Um, so, I like how it says a mystery because it would kind of really be a mystery if this harlot was actually a man, you know? Um, and then when it talks about, like Trump being, and then maybe the whole mystery of like the church being kind of like the bride of Christ and the Jewish people being, um, and Jesus being the the husband, the men, the male, um, and so that mystery, and then so the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. So the abominations of the earth, um, so like earth could be connected to America and heaven, um, could be connected to Israel, and so the abominations of the earth could be connected to the things that Trump's doing with this peace deal. I made a video about Trump's abomination, so you might want to take a look at that. And then it says, and I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. Okay, so we could see in this verse, if you like maybe talk about the blood of the saints being a picture of the blood of the Jewish people, and then it says the blood of the witnesses of Jesus, that could be a picture of the Christians. And so the woman is drunk with their blood. And so, like, is President Trump doing a lot of actions that are causing potential, blood to be shed in God's people? I think it's highly possible. I think, like in Israel, we're seeing the enemies of Israel, just um, revving up their activity against Israel, and causing bloodshed. And then also the blood of the witnesses of Jesus could be a picture of how, because Trump is doing these things, he's causing judgment to come to America, you know. Um, okay, so that's that. And then when I saw her, I wondered greatly. Well, everyone kind of wonders greatly when they see President Trump. And then kind of wondering too why he got voted in. Um, and the angel said to me, why do you wonder? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to come out of the abyss and go to destruction. Um, and those who dwell on the earth, whose name has not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will wonder when they see the beast that he was and is not and will come. And so, um, the beast being the dragon, um, and so he was and then is not and is about to come out of the abyss and go to destruction. And so I think that's definitely talking about Obama and how he was president and then they had a lot of power and definitely did a lot of destruction when he was president. But I do think that God's going to allow him to come back for a time, to bring judgment to America. And I mean, we definitely haven't seen him suffer the consequences of his Iran deal. We haven't seen the judgment for the Iran deal, and so I think we're gonna got to see that all get played out. Um, and um, and then those who aren't written in the book of life will wonder when they see the beast that he was and is not and will come. And so when Obama comes back, they're gonna wonder about that and probably be excited about it. Okay. So, verse 9, and then it says, here's the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, one is, the other has not yet come, and when he comes, he must remain a little while. And so, I talked about kind of like multiple fulfillment of prophecy. And so I think, we could have the kings being presidents, but we could also have the kings being um, connected to the seven churches of Revelation. And so we do have, we do have some of the fallen churches. Um, and so there could actually be maybe like seven leaders of churches, um, where five have fallen. Um, so, but with President Trump, we'll talk about how they connect to the presidents because, I mean, it works out really well. Where you have five have fallen, so five, presidents are no longer presidents anymore. Um, and then one is, so maybe kind of like the time frame would be, during Obama's term, and then the other has not yet come, and when he comes, he must remain a little while, so that could be connected to President Trump. So Obama was president, and then um, President Trump hasn't come yet, but when he does come, he just remains a little while, and so I think, President Trump's term's not going to be a complete term. What's interesting is that the when it's talking about this harlot, it's in chapters 17 and 18. And so I think that's really fascinating because President Trump was um, inaugurated on in 2017, and then he's been president for 2018, and then here we are in year 2019, and I think this could be when the Messiah comes. We saw on 2/19/2019 the super snow moon, which was definitely a picture of the Messiah. Um, and so, um, I definitely think, 2/19/2019 could definitely be a picture of how, um, Jesus is going to come in 2019. And that, so 17 and 18 relate to President Trump. And then we got definitely with 2018, we got the 666 in the 18. Um, so that's really interesting to me. Um, and so I think he's just going to have a really short presidency. And then the beast, which was and is not, and is himself also an eighth, and is one of the seven, and he goes to destruction. So Obama, he was a president, and then he's not a president. But then he comes back as the eighth president. And then, but he was one of the original seven, but he comes back to be an eighth president, and then he goes to destruction. And so that's where we see, God allows him, just to bring all the destruction that he wants to bring because he has murder in his heart. Um, and then the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. And so we see that, this, like I said, relates to the 10 in the wilderness that don't have faith, the 10 spies. Um, and they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. So the scripture talks about judgment coming for an hour. And so, this is the time of Obama that God's going to use to bring judgment on America. And then these 10 in the wilderness that don't have faith, would be the rebellious people in America that are going to rise up with Obama, and, they're all going to bring destruction. And these have one purpose, and they give their power and authority to the beast. So we definitely can see them all worshiping Obama. These will wage war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them because he is Lord of Lords and King of Kings, and those who are with him are the called and chosen and faithful. So this is definitely talking about Jesus. So Obama and his followers are going to wage war against Jesus. But Jesus is going to overcome him because he is Lord of Lords and King of Kings. And then he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So I talked about the waters being like the lies. But then this here, it talks about the waters, like the water being the lies of Satan. But the waters here are described as being peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And so actually that relates to, kind of the multiculturalism um, that, everybody, um, is into these days. Um, so that's a possibility for the waters. Um, and then the 10 horns which you saw, and the beast, these will hate the harlot, and will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh, and will burn her up with fire. Okay, so this verse is interesting because, I told you about how I felt like these verses kind of described Hillary Clinton, but then I can never get over why the 10 horns, which I saw as the rebellious people, would hate the harlot. If Hillary Clinton was the harlot, they don't hate Hillary. Let me tell you, they love her. And so that always kind of tripped me up. Um, but it's also possible these 10 horns, like a lot of people do kind of think like 10 nations are going to get together, and then they would hate the harlot, like the harlot being America, and make her desolate and naked. And so we could see maybe 10 nations gathering and um, hating America and, burning her up with fire, bombing us and stuff like that. But what's interesting, if you apply these to President Trump, they kind of work really well because if the 10 horns are like the rebellious people in America, we already see that there is a whole bunch of people in America that hate President Trump, and so, and like kind of they're chomping at the bit, like they want to come and, they want to impeach him and they want to get rid of him and stuff like that. So I could see that being a possible fulfillment of this verse where, they want to, you know, um, come against America and President Trump and make, make them all desolate and naked and eat her flesh and burn her up with fire. And then forget, it says, for God has put it in their hearts to execute his purpose by having a common purpose and by giving their kingdom to the beast until the words of God will be fulfilled. Um, and so like I said, I think God has a plan for judgment for America. I mean, he has to have a plan for judgment, and so he's going to use, the rebellious people to execute his purposes. And then the woman whom you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. Now, see, this is really fascinating because if you think about New York, city being the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth, um, then that would be interesting if you think about President Trump being the harlot because he'd be connected to New York City. I mean, he just is. Um, so, but this could also be talking about the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. Um, oh, well, so what's interesting about that too is that I think there's a lot of Jewish people in New York, and so that's kind of an interesting connection if you see like the kings of the earth being an expression talking about the Jewish people, so that's a possibility. Okay, so then on to chapter 18. And then it says, after these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illumined with his glory. And he cried out with a mighty voice, saying, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place of demons, and a prison of every unclean spirit, and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the passion of her immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality with her. And the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality. Okay, so um, it's kind of interesting that it says, after these things, I saw another angel having great authority, and the earth was illumined with his glory. That could be a picture of Jesus. Um, you know, uh, when he cries out, fallen is Babylon the Great. Um, she has become a dwelling place of demons. So far I haven't seen anyone really, well, I don't know, I guess some people talk about America being filled with demons, in a prison of every unclean spirit. And then it's interesting that it says a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. Because in one of my other videos, I talk about how there's the baker that gets thrown into jail with Joseph, and then he has the three baskets of bread on his head, and the birds come and eat the bread out of the top basket. And so these unclean and hateful birds, um, could be a picture of, these people that want to, eat the Jewish people, want to kill the Jewish people and eat their flesh. Um, and then it says, for all the nations have drunk of the wine of the passion of her immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality. Um, and so we see kind of this picture of the buying and selling with um, the merchants being listed. Um, and so that relates to the third beast in Revelation 13, that has, ends up being the 666, and it's interesting that this is listed in Revelation 18, Um, and then it says, I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, so that you will not participate in her sins and receive of her plagues. For her sins have piled up as high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Pay her back even as she has paid, and give back to her double according to her deeds. In the cup which she has mixed, mix twice as much for her. To the degree that she glorified herself and lived sensuously, to the same degree give her torment and mourning, for she says in her heart, I sit as a queen, and I am not a widow, and will never see mourning. Um, so, I mean, these are really sad verses. And um, in the cup which she has mixed, so if you think about this deal of the century, kind of being put together, mixed up, you know, you know, uh, like think about mixing alcohol, a drink of alcohol or something like that. So this deal of the century kind of being put together, and these ingredients of the deal of the century, kind of being all mixed together to create this peace deal. So we had the Jerusalem announcement and the Golan Heights announcement, um, and moving the embassy, um, all these ingredients making up, this deal of the century, um, which have, caused, um, just great problems in Israel, you know, um, because Israel's enemies are just, just really getting uh, stirred up by these things that Trump's been doing. Um, okay, so where was I? Okay. Um, oh, did I? Let's see. Yeah, sorry, I accidentally went to the other screen. Okay, and then it says, to the degree that she glorified herself and lived sensuously, to the same degree give her torment and mourning, for she says in her heart, I sit as a queen, and I am not a widow, and will never see mourning. Okay, so it's kind of interesting because if you think about, you know, how this harlot glorifies herself, and then just lives sensuously. So think about Trump and how he talks about how great he is, and how he's just gonna, whip the Middle East into shape, and he talks really highly of himself. And then, like living sensuously, like he just does what he wants to do. Um, and so it's kind of like paying him back, for his sins. Um, and so it's, the harlot says, I sit as a queen, and I am not a widow, and will never see mourning, and so Trump, obviously he wouldn't say he sits as a queen, but he's, um, you know, definitely, thinks of himself as like a prince, a king, a dictator type thing. Um, and then, it's interesting because this harlot says, "I am not a widow," and so if you think about like, you know, Jesus being the bridegroom, and so like think about Trump not really thinking that his bridegroom died or whatever, not being aware of that, you know, um, and even think of America not realizing that they are a widow, that their bridegroom has died in this country, and we don't really have true Christianity anymore in this country. And so then it says, "For this reason, in one day her plagues will come, pestilence and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire, for the Lord God who judges her is strong." Um, and so, I mean, there's definitely a mixture of, you have Trump who represents the country, and and so this harlot is, kind of a, you know, I mean, so President Trump could be, like the harlot in that he represents America. Um, and so in one day her plagues will come. So I talked about in my other video where God was just going to bring things were going to happen really fast. And so judgment on America is going to come really fast, and kind of, it talks about like in one day, just a real, a lot of quick judgment. Um, she will be burned up with fire. Um, definitely can see like nuclear war happening. We have a bunch of enemies. We have Russia, we have North Korea, we have Iran, that have nuclear weapons, so um, we could definitely see, and especially if we're going to be judged for, America's going to be judged for Obama, you know, putting together the Iran deal. I think we might see some consequences for that, and then seeing consequences from President Trump trying to make a deal with the North Korea guy instead of dealing with him. Um, and then, and the kings of the earth who committed acts of immorality and lived sensuously with her will weep and lament over her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance because of the fear of her torment, saying, "Woe, woe, the great city Babylon, the strong city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come." Um, so Um, if back to the kings of the earth, the kings are the Jewish people, they committed acts of immorality, all of them were, trying to get Trump to make this deal with Israel. When they, you know, um, and definitely if you think about America too being like a bad influence over Israel, passing on their sins to Israel, um, so that could be another uh, possibility for this verse. So I definitely, can see people weeping and lamenting when America gets judged. What's interesting is we see a picture of Abraham. Um, like he looks down on Sodom and Gomorrah when that gets judged, so we see that happening in scripture. Um, okay. Okay, and the merchants, oops, come back. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold, silver, precious stones, pearls, and fine linen, and purple, and silk, and scarlet, and every kind of citron wood, and every article of ivory, and every article made from very costly wood, and bronze, and iron, and marble. Okay, I'm not going to read all this because I'm running out of power here. But it goes on to say, and cargoes of horses and chariots and slaves and human lives. And so, we have these people kind of buying and selling, and it's their buying and selling is causing human lives to be sacrificed. Um, And then the fruit you long for has gone from you. Oh, and so it's interesting to think about because, Trump is definitely like a businessman and he's a wheeler and a dealer. He's the guy who made the art of the deal. And so, um, and he definitely had all these, dreams and ideas of, trying to, just buy and sell with other people, with other nations, and then like with North Korea, he was, trying to work out some, economic solution, to, whatever our problems with North Korea. So we see the buying and selling going on. Um, and then the fruit you long for is gone from you, and all things that were luxurious and splendid have passed away from you, and men will no longer find them. The merchants of these things who became rich from her will stand at a distance because of the fear of her torment, weeping and mourning, saying, Woe, woe, the great city, she who was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. Um, so it's kind of interesting because if you read the first chapter of Esther, um, the the king in there, he has a banquet for 180 days, which relates to Revelation 18, the whole 666 kind of thing. Um, and, you sort of see some duplication here, um, of the parallels of the linen, um, and luxurious things. Um, so I think those are connected. And then, um, and it's interesting about the merchants of these things who became rich from her. So we see pictures of, there's merchants that are becoming rich, off of, the harlot, off of the nation of Babylon, and so there's definitely people that are feeding their own flesh and like stealing from, the people in America. And then, um, it says, For in 1 hour such great wealth has been laid waste. We're definitely a country that has, a lot of great wealth. And every shipmaster and every passenger and sailor, and as many as make their living by the sea, stood at a distance and were crying out as they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like the great city? And they threw dust on their heads and were crying out, weeping and mourning, saying, Woe, woe, the great city in which all who had ships at sea became rich by her wealth. For in 1 hour she has been laid waste. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, because God has pronounced judgment for you against her. So we should, if we're following Jesus, we should be happy that God's going to bring judgment to America. Um, Then a strong angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, So will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence, and will not be found any longer. And the sound of harpists and musicians and flute players and trumpeters will not be heard in you any longer, and no craftsman of any craft will be found in you any longer. And the sound of a mill will not be heard in you any longer. And the light of a lamp will not shine in you any longer, and the voice of the bridegroom and bride will not be heard in you any longer. For your merchants were the great men of the earth, because all the nations were deceived by your sorcery. And in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all who had been slain on the earth. So it's interesting that the voice of the bridegroom and the bride is not heard in her any longer. Um, so we see the bridegroom being Jesus and the bride being, the church. So kind of interesting that that's listed. And then, the nations were deceived by your sorcery. Um, so, um, definitely, um, some of the stuff that Trump's been doing could be considered sorcery, where he's kind of, you know, acting like he could do magic and solve the problems in the Middle East. And then it says, and in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all who've been slain on the earth. So like I said, he's going to cause war in Israel, and he's going to cause war in America, and so, he's going to have blood on his hands. Um, anyways, and so I put in this verse from Revelation 19 because I wanted to talk about how 19 um, relates to Jesus, and so it says, I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it is called faithful and true, and in righteousness he judges and wages war. Um, and so we see, Jesus coming in chapter 19, so I thought that was interesting that 17 and 18 could relate to the 2 years of Trump's presidency, and then in 2019 we see Jesus the Messiah showing up. Um, and then in Matthew 21, so I wanted to mention this verse too because I thought it went really well with these chapters in Revelation. And so Jesus entered the temple and drove out all those who were buying and selling in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. And he said to them, it is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a robber's den. Okay, so picture Jesus coming and saying this to President Trump. Um, and so, Jesus comes and he drives out all those who are buying and selling, so it talks about, those with the mark of the beast, being the ones that are buying and selling. And then, Jesus overturns the tables of the money changers. Okay, so we see with the Judas, how he exchanges money, so that he could betray Jesus, so that would be the money changers. And then this is fascinating that it says Jesus overturns the seats of those who were selling doves. Okay, so think of doves being a metaphor for like peace deals, you know? And so we could see that Jesus is going to come and overturn the seats of, like President Trump and Netanyahu were working on this peace deal. And then also Obama, who worked on this Iran quote unquote peace deal. And he said to them, it is written, my house shall be called the house of prayer, but you are making it a robber's den. So there's all these people that are trying to get rich off of Israel, and so we have President Trump who's trying to make a name for himself by putting together this, deal of the century, and all the people that are working on it, and, so, you know, we could see, Jesus being angry because, if Israel has to focus on fighting their enemies, they can't be praying, and they can't be praying for the Messiah to come if they got to focus on fighting their enemies, so we could see why Jesus, would get mad about that. So there you go. That's my thoughts about is Trump the Harlot of Babylon. So just wanted to present that to you to give you something to think about. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.